What's the most inappropriate thing you've witnessed at a funeral? A narcissistic family member arrived late, after everyone else was at the graveside for the burial, and probably lurking behind a tomb, to pick the perfect time after the priest had just started talking, wearing an enormous hat and sunglasses and low-cut gown, like she was attending the Golden Globes red carpet or something, and loudly making an absolute scene of how devastated she was, darlings, and just generally making it all about her. A relative of my husband died. There was a gathering at her house after the funeral, hosted by her husband. It was mostly family of my husband, but there were a few friends. There was catered food and drink, and people were just general socializing and telling nice stories about the deceased. About 2 hours in, a man and woman in their mid-20s show up. They are acquaintances of the widower. They walk around the house a bit, grab a drink, and then disappear. I was asked to get some more drinks from the garage, which was off the kitchen. I opened the door and stepped into the garage. There was the young couple, leaning against a car and engaging in some pretty vigorous sexual relations. Another family member who was standing in the kitchen saw what I saw. I backed out of the garage because I was fairly embarrassed. I mean, who does that at a funeral? I guess the other relative told the widower, because the next thing I know there is shouting from the garage, and the widower is telling these two people in no uncertain terms that they needed to leave. Apparently, not only were they having sex in the garage, but they were doing lines of coke off the hood of the car. Only a few people who were at the gathering found out what happened, thank goodness. My cousin's funeral. He was 27 years old and killed in a single car crash after he hit a slippery patch on the road and smashed into a concrete wall. At his funeral, all of his brothers, sisters, and parents sat on the front row at his graveside service. Then, lo and behold, my cousin's ex-girlfriend of over a year shows up and immediately inserts herself onto the front row next to his sisters and proceeds to scream, cry, scream, wail, and throw herself on the ground periodically throughout the service. All of the family just gave her awkward stares, with no one wanted to address her inappropriate behavior. I had never seen that type of attention-demanding drama queen antics before, or since. Edit. Just wanted to throw this in. This was a funeral with military honors, Air Force, and they did the gun salute at the gravesite. I don't remember how many times they fire, but at each gunshot, she would literally shriek and collapse into the arms of either of the sisters standing next to her. I do recall at the very end, the youngest sister was sick of that shit and just let her fall on the ground. And it was raining heavily and rather muddy. My dad's cousin, who didn't like our family, did this at my sister's visitation. She showed up and started bawling over the casket and brushing the side of my sister's face. I walked over there to comfort her and she shoved me. I had no sleep, nothing to eat for a few days, and I fell, almost taking the casket down with me. That cousin stopped crying, straightened up, and apologized to everyone except me. Maybe isn't as over the top as most of these comments, but I'm one of the Marines that has to go present the flag to the next of kin when a service member dies. It's usually old Vietnam and Korea vets, but sometimes it's a Desert Storm or recent war vet, and the mother is there receiving the flag instead of a son or daughter. Point is, I've probably been to 45 funerals in the past year. It's striking how often someone's phone goes off during the service. It seems nearly every other or every third service someone's ringtone start playing. There's been a few times where someone will get up from their seat and answer the phone to picture, if you will, two elderly women in a funeral squaring up as people are still crying from the ceremony. At the lunch after my grandpa's funeral, his daughter from a previous marriage, D, who no one had seen in years, showed up. D had been writing bad checks all the way to the state prison and had definitely had some unresolved beef with my family when she got out. The last time my mom saw her was when was 11, and D left her infant daughter for my mom to babysit and never came back. Fast forward to the funeral. D is acting like it's a family reunion, but no one is having it, since she's basically screwed everyone in the room in one way or another. My grandpa's last girlfriend, a legally blind woman, tried to physically fight her until others stepped in. Edit. Gave my crazy half-aunt a pseudonym for clarity. Edit 2. The baby left with my mom at age 11 was not me, but that would be an amazing plot twist. D had said she was just having a night out and actually decided to run off to San Francisco. This was the early 70s, and left her baby. When D didn't come back, my mom called her mom, got a hold of a relative that took care of the baby until D could be reached. Sorry, I don't have a lot of details after that, but the baby grew up and she actually arrived at the funeral with D, and I hear the apple didn't fall far from the tree. Edit 3. I had forgotten this part somehow. After the funeral, D tried to steal the car will to grandpa's blind boo, but my family thought ahead, and a couple of my uncles waited around the house until D came for the car. They came outside and apparently she was scared off. Blind boo got the car in the end and wrecked it immediately. I can't make this shit up. My brother-in-law's girlfriend locked herself in a car, cried and screamed threatening to kill herself. At my father-in-law's funeral, she was fine 5 minutes later and explained to my in-law she did it because she's not used to not having all the attention. She thought her being pregnant would make people forget that the father died. Not a funeral, but my grandmother was on her deathbed. She was going in and out of consciousness. My asshole father and his asshole sister start arguing over who will get her wedding ring. Not for sentimental value, but because they wanted to sell it. Anyway, to make a long story short, they took the ring off and their mother came out of consciousness and the first thing she said was, "Where is my ring? Freaking scumbags." My best friend died last year from a random heart failure at 25. The pastor at the funeral went on for about 10 minutes about how we had all killed him because we were sinners and that we should join his church to make amends. He didn't know any of us. It was very uncomfortable. My step-grandmother died a few months before the Borat movie came out, so everyone was in full-blown Borat mode. Someone's phone went off, and their ringtone was "Throw the Jew down the well." Edit. She, as well as most of the people attending the funeral, were all Jewish. The priest repeatedly referred to my grandmother by the wrong name. After the 4th or 5th time my aunt got up and quietly told him the correct name. My grandmother had attended church weekly for decades. There was no reason for the priest to not know his parishioner. Needless to say, we did not pay his fee. My sister's elderly Phil found out he had cancer and shot himself in the head. He wasn't one bit religious, but her husband, his son, had joined the Mormon church and decided on his own that the funeral services should be held there. The Mormon minister, who had never met the deceased, proceeded to hold everyone but me and my spouse captive for well over an hour while he described in minute detail why we should all join his church and become Mormons. We got up and walked out on the sales pitch after 20 minutes. Freaking asshole. That happened at my brother's funeral. He was a high school teacher, so a number of his young and vulnerable students were there. The minister? I don't know if I can call him that, because he was some lunatic who opened a church in his garage that my parents found. Anyway, that guy clearly thought, OMG, this is my time to shine. Got to get all these kids in my garage church. He went on a tirade, literally gesturing towards my brother's dead body. It was an open casket, telling these crying teenagers that, OBTW, you will go to hell when this happens to you, if you don't accept Jesus right here right now. And that's how my sister and I both almost walked out of our own brother's funeral. We were so grossed out that he was trying to use our dead brother's body to emotionally blackmail a bunch of kids into joining his church. I think it should be in an instruction manual somewhere not to talk about hell at a funeral. That feels like a faux pas. A few years ago, when we were 15, a friend of mine committed suicide. She'd been sexually assaulted and raped by her mother's partner as a child, and the mother stayed with the guy, so my friend and her younger sister ended up in foster care. The funeral was fucking horrendous, with the obvious rift between her biological family and foster family. I know where I stand on the matter, and the funeral celebrant seemed to be trying to bridge the gap for the sake of respect for my friend, but he kind of came across like he was way out of his depth and didn't really know what was happening. The whole thing was overly religious considering the sort of person my friend was, and I know she would have preferred to have her actual self celebrated / mourned for, rather than the whole thing being made about, "Oh, but we lost our daughter, not you, you're the bad ones, we're the family. She deserved so much better in life and in death. I still mourn for that girl and the life she led." My father's funeral. After the service and the reception after, my mother, brother, and sister headed back to our family home. A bunch of my father's siblings and their family were also staying at the house with us. We got home a few minutes before everyone else. I was sitting at a table in the living room when I could see their cars come down the driveway. They all got out and were hugging and seemingly congratulating each other. The reception after the service was beautifully put together and was actually a fun time. A fitting send-off for my father. So I assumed they were still just having fun from that. Until they came inside. They all came in together very quickly and quietly. They came up to me and my older brother sitting at the table and kind of crowded around like a bunch of kids about to see if they could have a cookie before dinner. My aunt Barbara smugly stood at the front and asked, "So when are we going to be doing the reading of the will to see what was left to us all?" My brother and I just looked at each other for a few moments before we turned to them to say, "Are you kidding? Reading of the will? Like a soap opera? There is no reading of the will. Everything that belonged to my father now just belongs to my mother." The look of defeat, but not shame, was disgustingly transparent. They were supposed to stay another few nights. They packed up and left that afternoon. Edit. I made up my name on the spot, not my comments. You can take the 2 seconds to click on it and see for yourself.